Hello, Year 10. We've had two lessons looking at Ozymandias? Is that all really? Two lessons looking at the poem Ozymandias. So in this lesson, I'm going to talk you through how to write a GCSE style essay on the poem Ozymandias. So you need a pen handy, you need your book, and at various stages I'll tell you to pause and to write down. This is your first attempt at writing a poetry essay, I think, so we'll take it nice and slow, and as always, if you need any help, then just email me. So in your answer you will analyse 3 quotes, and this is the first one. What you're going to do is exactly the same as what we have done with in Macbeth answers, and exactly the same as we have done with Christmas Carol and an Inspector Calls. It's point quote analysis. So you were getting pretty good at this before we went off. So let's see how we go. Right, our first quote is, "Whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command." So we've got to know what we are describing here. We've got to know the specific thing being described. So what's being described here is the face of the ruined statue of Ozymandias, and in particular the facial expression that the sculptor carved onto the face. So the frown, the wrinkled lip, and the sneer of cold command. If you don't know what a sneer is, I try to do my best to show you. It's kind of, yeah. Does that help you? It's kind of in order to give the impression that if you sneer at somebody, you think they are less than you. You think that you are superior to them. It's dismissive, if you like, as if people are just nothing compared to you. So those are the things described on the statue of Ozymandias' face. So as always, we start off with the point, and the point explains what the poet is describing in this particular quote. So I would like you to pause the video in about a minute. I would like you to write down point, and then literally write down what the poet describes in this quote. Your sentence starter is Shelley. Remember, we always use the surname of writers. Shelley describes. Okay, so pause the video if you could use that sentence starter and write down your point now. Okay, moving on. We now need to zoom in for the analysis. We need to zoom in on specific phrases, and more often than not it's phrases, not quotes. So let's start with the frown. Whose frown? So you're just going to explain to me what you think the frown suggests about Ozymandias. So remember, Ozymandias didn't necessarily want a frown to be on his face. It was the sculptor that put the frown on there. So 2 things here. Can you tell me, what does the phrase "whose frown" suggest about what the sculptor thought of Ozymandias, and what does the phrase "whose frown" suggest what Ozymandias' personality was like? So your sentence starter is "whose frown" in quotation marks, followed by emphasizes, and then, like I say, what does this suggest about what the sculptor thought of Ozymandias and what Ozymandias' personality was like? Okay, if you could write that down now. Quick reminder, whose frown in quotation marks suggests or emphasizes, and try and write down 3 or 4 things that emphasizes. Pause the video now. Okay, we're now going to zoom in for the analysis. We're now going to zoom in on a second part of the quote. I think we'll avoid wrinkled lip. I'm not sure what you can say about that. I think it just suggests he forgot to put his, what do you call it on? What do you call it? Lip balm, that's it. So we'll go for sneer of cold command. So your sentence starter is in quotation marks, sneer of cold command, and we will go with the analytical phrase of suggests. So in order to help you, try and answer this. What does sneer suggest about the attitude and personality of Ozymandias? And remember, about 4 minutes ago, I told you what sneer means. And once you've done that, let's have a look if you can explain what does cold command suggest about Ozymandias. Can you remember what technique it is, firstly? If so, you could start with the use of, what's the technique? Cold command, and explain what that suggests. So, command obviously means orders. He's used to giving orders. When it says cold, what does it mean when we say somebody is cold? Not physically, but emotionally. What does it suggest about their personality? They're a cold person. And if somebody is commanding, what does it suggest about their personality? Okay, so in brackets, sneer of cold command emphasizes or suggests, and try and write down 4 or 5 things that suggests. Pause the video now. Okay, what might be a good idea if you're finding this tricky is if you send me what you've done so far, and I can just tell you whether you're on the right lines or suggest how to improve it. What we're going to have a look at next, you might not remember, but I taught you that in English literature you have to write about the writer's ideas and the context of the text as well. The context means what sort of ideas was the writer influenced by at the time the poet wrote this, or how were they influenced? So I'd like you to have a go at the context here. So remember, Shelley was influenced. He was an anti-authoritarian figure. He disliked authority. He disliked those that made rules. And in this quote we have somebody who makes rules. It says a sneer of cold command. So that suggests that Ozymandias was a powerful character, with somebody that had lots of authority, but was not a warm person, was not a caring person. So a bit like Macbeth, possibly a tyrant. So what could we say that, for the context and ideas, what could we say Shelley's ideas are about Ozymandias? What's his attitude to leaders like Ozymandias? So could you have a go at that, please? And you could refer here to the fact that he might have been influenced by the French Revolution and how he disliked the way that the French royalty treated the general public. Or you could talk about his general upbringing and how he rejected authority. Your sentence starter for this could, if you want a sentence starter, could be Shelley was influenced by, or in Shelley's era. Remember, era means a period of time. So you're basically saying it's a more formal way of saying in Shelley's age. So if you could start with those two sentences, one of those two sentences, please, and explain what idea, which of his ideas is Shelley trying to get across here in terms of his attitude towards Ozymandias. Okay, pause the video, have a go at that. There's the cursor. Okay, on to the second quote. Now, I hope you got on okay with the first quote, but by all means send it to me after you've done, and I'll tell you whether you're on the right lines or not. So the second quote is, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." I think we'll end with that bit. We won't include the nothing beside remains. Okay, so as always, we have to be very clear about what specifically is being described here. And this is the inscription on the pedestal. So if you imagine my cup, can you see that? My little princess cup. If you imagine that's the statue, and the statue stands on something, which here is my inhaler. This is the weirdest example ever. See that? So that's the statue. It's what it stands on. Here, my inhaler is called the pedestal. And if you've ever been to Trafalgar Square and seen the statue of Nelson and stuff like that, you'll know that they have an inscription, writing on. So across here, there's some writing. Yeah. So maybe one day there'll be a statue of you at St. Martin's. Here stands, I don't know, Nathaniel Hale, Daniel Gittins, Jonathan Terry. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of you who studied at St. Martin's before going on to be a famous whatever. So these are the words, this quote, King of Kings, these are the words inscribed on the statue on the bottom here. And they are half sunk in the desert sands. I'll put these down now. Hopefully the cup and the inhaler help you there. Sorry if they confuse you. So specifically what is being described is what Ozymandias decided to have inscribed. And remember, inscribed means like, obviously you can't write on stone because it gets washed away. So chipped in, chiseled in. It's what he had inscribed on the pedestal of the statue. So can you start off with the point? In the point you are literally just explaining what the poet is describing in this quote. And your sentence starter is Shelley describes. Okay, so pause the video and write that down now. All done? Right, now down to the analysis. So we're going to zoom in. This is quite a long quote, so we'll zoom in 2 or 3 times. If you've forgotten what zooming in means, it means just picking a short phrase that seems to be important. So we'll go with, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings." So in your analysis, I want you to try and explain, what does it suggest about his personality and his attitude towards himself that he is proclaiming, "My name is Ozymandias"? I don't know about you, but I wouldn't go around and saying, "My name is Ian," or "My name is Mr. Pallet." I would be too shy and too embarrassed to do that. So what does it say that he is prepared to boast about his name, firstly? And secondly, looking at King of Kings, what does he want? This is a statue that he knows will be looked at after he is dead. So what is he trying to say to the world about himself, about his status, and about his importance? And again, what does it explain about how he thinks about himself and what his personality is like? So if you could have a go at those now, hopefully those tips help. Your sentence starter is, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings," in quotation marks, followed by the word emphasizes, and then your explanation of what it does emphasize. Pause the video now. Have a go at writing. Okay, we're now on to the second part of the quote. So this is going to be, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Okay, so in order to help you here, firstly, "look on my works" is an imperative. if you remember, an imperative in English is what you'd call a command or an order. So he's telling people to look at his statue. So firstly, the fact that he uses the imperative, the command, what does that suggest about him? Then secondly, he refers to the statue as my works. My is a possessive pronoun because he's saying that this was my work. I created this. So again, what does that possessive pronoun, my work, suggest about his attitude towards the statue? And what does it suggest he feels about this thing he has created in the desert? And finally, we are going to zoom in on ye mighty and despair. Now, remember when he says, look on my works, ye mighty, when he says ye mighty, he is addressing all the other leaders, all the other powerful people in the world that existed when he put the statue up, or who had ever heard of this statue. So he wants all the most powerful people in the world to recognize that he is the most powerful leader that ever existed in Egypt or anywhere else. So ye mighty, he's addressing all those in power. And when he says and despair, he says, look on my works, all you great rulers, all you great leaders, and despair. You will never create anything as great as what I have created. You will never be as great as me. So on ye mighty in despair, you are trying to explain, again, what is it, think about what is it he wants from other people? How does he want to be remembered? And what is his attitude towards other great leaders? It's a bit of kind of psychology, this. What kind of, those words on the statue, what kind of personality do they suggest he is? On the face of it, he appears confident, but what is it he actually wants from other great leaders? And what does he want from history? Okay, your sentence starter is ye mighty in despair, suggests, emphasizes, either of those two, and write down as much as you can think about what ye mighty in despair suggests. Pause the video now. Okay, hopefully you've done some brilliant analysis on that quote. I shall actually bring up the right quote. So we'll just have a little bit of a go at, come on, there we go. We'll have a little bit of go at adding context here. I know context is harder for you, and we will look at this in year 11, but just a sentence or two, because remember it is worth 20% in the exam. Okay, so remember Ozymandias was an Egyptian king, and remember that they believed in the afterlife. And obviously if they were remembered as a good and powerful king, then they would be seen as successful leaders. A bit like Macbeth. Macbeth wanted to kill Duncan in order to get power, but that was only half the battle. The remainder of the battle is making sure that your power and your reputation carried on after your life. Because they believed in a life beyond death, they believed in an afterlife, then obviously if they were remembered as poor leaders, as bad leaders, then that could mean they don't get to go to heaven. So, what does this quote tell us? What is Shelley trying to tell us about Egyptian leaders? What did they want their legacy to be? And remember, legacy is the way you are remembered after you have died. So what is Shelley trying to suggest about Egyptian leaders, possibly about all historical leaders, and what they want their reputation to be, and what they want to happen to that reputation after they have died? So Your sentence starter is Shelley, name of the poet, remember, seems to be suggesting, and then you're just going to explain what is Shelley suggesting about Egyptian leaders, what was important to them, and why they would build this statue in the middle of the desert. Okay, pause the video and have a go. Okay, hope you've stuck with it so far. Hope you're doing okay. Well done. If you are, you can send any bits that you've written so far to me to check. We're now on to the last quote, which is boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So what specifically is being described here? Well, it's the desert. We've just had the statue described. The statue is in ruins. Although it appeared to be big, it is now in ruins. So this is a description of the desert. Boundless means without boundaries. Bare means there is nothing in the desert. So you can look as far as the eye can see and not see a thing. And remember, this description of the desert being huge and massive comes straight after the description of the inscription. So Shelley is deliberately contrasting the sheer size and scale and timeless nature of the desert with that rather arrogant, deluded inscription that Ozymandias had inscribed on his statue. So really what's happening here is Shelley is saying, yeah mate, you might thought you would be a great leader. You might think your name was going to go down in history, but look at what happened to you. You're now just a ruined statue in the desert. There's nothing else surrounding you for miles. Nobody is ever going to come here. You are dwarfed by the power and scale of nature. Nobody even knows you exist now. That's how vast this desert is. Only the traveller came across you by coincidence. Nobody remembers you. So, write down the point, please. I can see I've forgotten to put the reminder there. So, the point is what's being described. Literally, what does the poet describe in this quote? And your sentence starter is Shelley describes. Pause the video, write that down. Okay, back to the quote. So the first thing we're going to look at, zoom in on, is boundless and bare. This is a description of the desert. Remember, boundless means without boundaries, bare means there's nothing in it. There's a technique here, isn't there? What's that? What's that? Alliteration, did you say? Yes, well done, it's alliteration. So, what does the alliteration suggest about the size of the desert, the scale of the desert? So think about the image that Shelley is trying to create here. What's he saying about nature? But more importantly, what's he saying about nature compared to the power that Ozymandias thought he had? So remember, this description comes straight after that inscription. My name is Ozymandias, king of kings. Look at my works, ye mighty, and despair. So, your sentence starter is boundless and bare emphasizes. What does it emphasize about the desert? And also, by putting this directly after the inscription, my name is Ozymandias, what does it suggest about the statue and Ozymandias' power compared to the vastness of the desert? A bit of a tricky one, but have a go. You can always email me and ask for help. Okay, pause the video now. Right, back to the last bit we're going to zoom in on, the lone and level sands. Lone and level? Same as boundless and bare? Yes, it's alliteration. So it's very similar to boundless and bare. Lone means there's obviously there's nothing in there. It's a lonely place. And the level sands means sometimes on pictures of the desert you see big lumps of sand and it goes up and it goes down. But this desert is just as flat as far as the eye can see. And Shelley does this deliberately to emphasize how vast in size the desert is, but also by contrasting the vastness and the level nature of the sands, it makes the statue seem tiny and irrelevant, and the idea that they stretch far away makes it seem even bigger. So I guess you could say here the power of nature is without boundaries, is timeless, whereas Ozymandias' power didn't last beyond the actual collapse of his statue and his own death. So, lone and level sands stretch far away is your sentence starter, followed by emphasizes. What does it suggest about the desert? What does it suggest about nature in general? And what does it suggest about how long the power of nature lasts compared to how long the power of man lasts? And here the power of man is Ozymandias. Lone and level sands stretch far away emphasizes. Pause the video, have a go, email me if you're stuck. Okay, we'll have last thing, we'll have a go at looking at the writer's ideas. Remember, the writer's ideas is what the writer is trying to say. Generally, writers are trying to say something about what it's like to be human or what nature's like. It's big picture stuff. So although this is a story about a poem about a statue found in the desert, really the ideas that Shelley's writing about could apply now as much as ever. So he's writing about how the power of nature will always outlast the power of man. And there's another poem we look at which describes things like money and books and buildings, and it says that these are all temporary creations. The books have only been around for a few hundred years, money's only been around for a few thousand years, but nature has always been there and always will be there. So that's the main theme of this poem. Human power is nothing compared to the power of nature. So I'd like you to have a go at writing that down, please. And especially so in this quote. This quote really is about that timeless power of nature. It will never end compared to the temporary power of man. So your sentence starter is, Shelley seems to be suggesting, and just write down a sentence or two. What is Shelley suggesting overall about the power of nature in this line and in the poem? Okay, pause the video and write that down. All done. Well done if you have got all the way through the end of that. It is tricky even with a teacher there and being in class, writing down your first poetry essay, but doing it at home is even trickier. So well done if you've got all the way to the end and you've given it a really good go. Anything you do now will really set you up for year 11. And one thing's for sure, having a go at these tasks now will mean you are a lot better prepared for year 11 than students who haven't had a go at the tasks at all. If you need any help at all on this, please email me, or I can always call you to talk you through it. But well done for having a go. Email me your answers and I'll send you each feedback on your answer. Okay, have a nice week. Cheerio. Where's the pause? Always just this bit at the end.